Emotional intelligence is a skill. We can hone it. So the first step is always awareness. So I need to become aware of where are my strengths, where am I lagging, right? So I can get that through feedback, my own self-assessment, to get a sense of where am I thriving? And so for your example, you're a great listener. How can I, one, enhance that? I'm a great listener. I'm an active listener. I'm able to engage in perspective taking. I'm able then to understand. I may need to, if I'm not great at communicating, understand what's happening. If I'm yelling at someone, I understand the situation, but I'm getting activated into the sense of I'm not able to be calm, grounded, centered in my window of tolerance to communicate calmly and articulate my ideas. So that's that awareness. Then it's about, well, how do I then adjust or modify that so that I can articulate, get across to my audience the message I need to relay.
Welcome to Minutes with Mango, Life in Motion. I'm your host, Johnny Mango. This is the place where we inquire about lifestyle, culture, and careers. Weekly, we meet with new guests that make a contribution of their insightful stories about their careers and how those careers impact their lifestyle and culture. Hello, everybody. This is Johnny Mango, and today we are going to have an interesting discussion because there is something in the workplace that sometimes gets overlooked, and we've got an expert here to share some really important information, and that's the psychology of the workplace and the psychology of career. So today I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Meagan Yarmey, who is based with the Amanda Tobe Group team in Toronto, Canada.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit, Meagan, before we get into what you really do. You're obviously a psychologist. You got a Ph.D. in social psychology. Tell us how you got into what you do now and how you counsel people and those types of things.
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure. A little bit myself, my story. I grew up in a family. My dad was a research psychologist. So I was definitely influenced by that. My whole family studies psychology. And I think is the process and self-evolution of understanding who I am. When I graduated from my doctoral studies, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Did I want to be an academic? Did I want to go work in policy or in private sector? And so the process of experiencing the challenges of trying to find what actually fit me and trying to seek counsel and guidance in some ways had that impact of finding out through some difficult challenges and times of, yeah, this is it, but it's not quite, or this is it, or that's not quite. So that pursuit of trying to understand self and find a fit of where I could utilize my skills and resources eventually allowed me to land here where I'm able to use my knowledge base and personal experience to help facilitate others in their own experience in the workforce. So really, it's that use of psychological knowledge that I gleaned over the years and personal experience working as a clinician in the mental health world, but also now applying it to in that intersection of who we are and how we navigate our careers.
Yeah, so I started years ago with my career in the professional world, and one of my observations has been that a lot of people actually have a lot of fears when it comes to the workplace, and those fears get manifested in different ways. I've learned in my old age is don't project your fear on me. But can you tell us a little bit about in the workplace how fears manifest themselves and what triggers that for different people in different situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think we come to the workforce based on our life experiences to date. So those things where have been milestones that have led us to personal successes and some of those challenges and how we understand those challenges, how we see ourselves, our identity, the beliefs we hold, and then how they manifest. Then there's that interaction of expectations of self, expectations of others, the interaction and dynamic interpersonal communications. And so there's this complex web of circumstances that can promote and hinder or lead us to thrive. So how we are in our personal life is going to be exhibited in many respects similarly within a system, within an organization. So a lot of it is about what do we tell ourselves, how we think, how we feel, and then what we do, that behavior.
And I would think some of us, because we're all individuals in life, I would think some of us bring our what I would call family problems to the workplace and others don't. And just mixing those together when you have a group of people, I would think can be a challenge.
Absolutely, absolutely. So social conditioning in terms of our how we are raised, the norms, the cultures, the expectations from our family of origin, from our systems, the school systems, the time period when we're born, all have a part to play of how we then behave, how we either feel comfortable to be our authentic selves or to behave in a way that we perceive as wanted or desired or needed. So those circumstances will impact each of us in different ways. So that's how it can manifest.
Can you share with us, number one, the definition of emotional intelligence,
Word.
and then how that plays out in the workplace from a relationship point of view? Because every workplace is based on a bunch of relationships,
Mhm.
up and down the ladder, side to side, depending on the organization. But most businesses have more than one person working in them, and so there's relationships. So how does emotional intelligence, number one, what is it, and how does it play out?
Absolutely. So emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive, understand, regulate, and manage emotions in oneself and others. So Daniel Goleman came up with this concept in around mid 90s with a model which has 4 domains. So that's self-awareness. So self-awareness talks about emotional awareness, accurate self-assessment, and self-confidence. Another domain would be self-management. How well can I control my emotions? So self-control. How adaptable am I? How agile am I? To what extent do I have optimism? It also has social awareness. So am I empathetic? Am I aware of the organizational structures or the system structures? And how apt am I to engage in service or service awareness or mentality? And then the final component is relationship management. So, am I able to influence others? Am I able to manage conflict? Am I apt to engage in teamwork or am I more motivated for self promotion? So, these different components can influence how we perceive situations and then how we navigate them. Why does it matter? Emotional intelligence is really important, of course, because they talked about those dynamics, right? So it can come out a number of different ways. One, the first thing would be our communication skills. How do I perceive the situation? How do I read it? How do I navigate it? How do I communicate? So it can either increase our collaboration or it can reduce understanding and lead to conflicts. It can impact how I relate to others and lead or relate.
So that's a complex set of emotional intelligence, I guess. That's a complex set of behaviors. How does one sort out? I would think that, and but I would think that each of us have different strengths and different weaknesses when it comes to emotional intelligence.
I would agree.
That we're all different.
Absolutely.
So so if as an example, I just kind of make this up, but as an example, let's say that I'm a great listener, okay, but I'm not really a great communicator. I don't know if that makes any sense. And maybe that's not the best example, but uh, I hear what you're saying, but I tend to yell at everybody. Okay. How does one manage that?
Okay. So I think, first of all, it's really important to say that emotional intelligence is a skill. We can hone it. So the first step is always awareness. So I need to become aware of where are my strengths, where am I lagging, right? So I can get that through feedback, my own self-assessment to get a sense of where am I thriving? And so for your example, you're a great listener. How can I one enhance that? I'm a great listener. I'm an active listener. I'm able to engage in perspective taking. I'm able then to understand. I may need to, if I'm not great at communicating, understand what's happening if I'm yelling at someone. I understand a situation, but I'm getting activated into the sense of I'm not able to be calm, grounded, centered in my window of tolerance to communicate calmly and articulate my ideas. So that's that awareness then is about, well, how do I then adjust or modify that so that I can articulate, get across to my audience the message I need to relay. So that
Right.
again is a skill. So awareness, learning some skills and strategies, understanding with intention what the goal is, and then to execute it. And that takes practice.
Right. So I would think that in that practice, somebody that had that behavior would probably recognize that they had some inner fear somewhere that was triggering all that commotion, even though they,
Yeah, exactly. It's really understanding what's going on in the environment, what's going on internally that's that's coming together to create that outcome. So that awareness piece, both themselves and possibly, most likely, feedback from others, where we're in a situation we're going to monitor visual cues that people are providing and the responses. So once we get an accurate assessment of what's going on, we can then start to drill it down as to, okay, what needs to be modified if my
Right.
intention is to come across in a more positive way to meet my goals.
So how do we manage those? I gave you an example of emotion in this little example I gave you.
Hmm.
How do we manage those emotions? How does one in the workplace, number one, what I'm hearing from you is one needs to recognize where their emotions are playing out because that's
Hmm.
part of emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
But then how does one manage those emotions? That's I think that's the critical question that could help a ton of people in the workplace.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about emotional intelligence, emotion regulation. So the first place is that self-awareness. So recognizing the emotional triggers and patterns, learning the skills around self-regulation, developing empathy. So that's that active listening to understand someone else's perspective, and then developing those social skills. There's a model, having said that, that I think is really helpful that a psychologist in the US has come up with. Called Ruler. So Mark Brackett is as a psychologist, I think he's at Yale University. He's come up with a model that is used as, and there's an acronym call it for it. It's called Ruler. So Ruler talks about recognizing what's going on, the emotions in myself and others, understanding where they're coming from, to be able to label it accurately. So really getting down to that level of granularity. And so the emotional literacy to be able to label it accurately, to learn how to express it. How do I express this emotion so that it's going to be received? And then how to regulate. So these are all skills that we can slowly develop. I think the awareness piece, the noticing piece is a really key to understand what's driving that. Emotions in the past were labeled good or bad. I don't endorse that. Emotion is information. It's saying something, is understanding where is that coming from. Can I then drill down to the appropriate label for that? What is that? Is it anger? Is it rage or is it a myth? Am I gleeful or am I sad? So when we drill down, then we have a better grasp of, okay, what is that feeling place? That feeling place for emotion is also an affect and a physiological, it's that interaction. So I have a physiological response to it. My body's getting activated or deactivated. And then I have a psychological, emotional experience of that together.
So in most of your work, do you work with organizations or you do work with individuals in organizations?
So I'd say for 90% of it, we're working with the individuals who are coming saying, I'm struggling with X, Y, or Z. I would like to develop skill sets around this. And so we'll understand what are they bringing to the table? What are the circumstances where they get activated or where they want to develop? And then we work with them one-on-one. So we do individual one-on-one sessions. Sometimes we do groups as well.
If somebody hears this and goes, gee, I've got a problem in where I work and whatever that may be, and I could use that type of help. It's not necessarily a single person can come to you for assistance, for help, is what I'm hearing from you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Is that unique little intersection of I'm an individual embedded within a system. How can I help my personal experience uh, so that I can thrive, so I can achieve my goals within this organization? So it may be identifying where's the shift between what is in my internal psychological experience, what are the skills I need to process, to develop, so that I can then within that external environment more aptly engage.
The one term that I've heard a lot about over the last few years that I'm hoping my listeners may relate to this is the term the imposter syndrome. Can you share some background on the imposter syndrome and what it is, where it comes from, and how one can deal with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Imposter syndrome is also referred to as imposter phenomenon, the inner imposter, or imposterism. And this is a psychological pattern where individuals doubt their achievements and fear being exposed as a fraud, despite, and this is important, despite evidence of their competence. So it's often spoken about among high achieving professionals, and it often conflicts with things such as perfectionism, high self expectations, and high self criticism. So I'd say it's best described as a feeling or an internal experience of intellectual phoniness and a persistent sense of being a fraud. It can show up as a nagging belief that you lack the skills, knowledge, or even competence to fulfill your job or role. And this is both despite external recognition and evidence of good work. So this concept, the imposter syndrome, came out in the late 70s by Clance and Imes. And they had a significant amount of research supporting this. And this been replicated in both pure and applied fields, highlighting its prevalence, the causes and impacts on mental health, career progression, and this is across various demographic groups. So it's not just one type of individual. It's really timely idea or concept or phenomenon that's happening and has been dubbed the workplace anxiety du jour. The most commonly cited statistic is that approximately 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. And this figure has been referenced, widely both in academic and popular psychology. Where it comes from, there's a number of different ideas. It can be how we're socialized, how our family of origin, how our systems at play. It can be also our temperaments, that we're more sensitive to things. It can be from different lived experiences, but it comes down to often how the individual perceives themselves within an environment. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
So you said 70% are affected by this.
At some point in their lives, yes. That's what the data
And
is.
so it doesn't necessarily stick with somebody. It,
Correct.
it comes and goes based on their environment, their situation that they're in, and those types of things. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Absolutely. It's not a personality type, right? We may have tendencies towards being more susceptible to it based on some underlying drivers, some underlying lived experiences. So it's not something that you are stuck with. It's something that once we understand, I may be struggling with this, we now can actually start to overcome it through changing or shifting how we perceive situations, how we respond.
So it sounds to me like it's somebody that has the ability that doesn't necessarily believe in their ability. Am
Correct.
I, get, am I getting that right?
That's right. So self-doubt is a huge component of it. So it's doubting one's capabilities to perform to their personal expectations.
Right. Okay. So I guess the big question for that then is how does one overcome it? How does how does somebody if let's say I'm an MBA and I'm the chief financial officer of some company and I have a lot of responsibility and I'm very competent. I was at the top of my class, but geez, I just don't feel like I should really be doing this job for whatever reason. How does one overcome this?
Yeah. Well, it sounds daunting. When we drill down to it, there are a number of different components and approaches that we can use to help an individual develop the skills to overcome it. So we want to increase self-worth, emotional resilience, and long-term confidence. The key to overcoming it is shifting how we think, right? How we manage emotions and the actions we take despite self-doubt. So I like to say, think, feel, do. So I think of it in terms of 4 different buckets of approaches. The first would be in terms of how we think. So we can engage in things such as cognitive restructuring. What does that mean? That means changing our narrative. So we can use a cognitive behavioral approach where we learn to reframe our self-perceptions. we can change or address our attribution bias and start to identify what are rules that we have, how we're supposed to be in the world, and our core beliefs. So as we identify and challenge them, we can then perceive situations differently. So, for example, if I want to reframe my self perceptions, instead of thinking I don't deserve this, I become aware that that's my self talk. I become aware of the situations where this inner critic comes up that I'm telling myself, I don't deserve this. I learn to then modify it and shift it to, I worked hard and earned this. So that would be a reframing approach. I can also learn to address attribution bias in a different way. So I start to give credit for my successes to myself in terms of my effort, my skill, and perseverance, rather than writing it off and saying, that was just luck, or it's just the circumstances external to me that accounted for this. In terms of changing my core beliefs, I start to identify I have these limiting beliefs, like I have to be perfect. And I start to use more flexible way of thinking about it to, I'm more capable. I am capable of this, and I'm learning to grow. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket is something we've talked a lot about, is emotional regulation, and then self-compassion. So I'm learning to manage my self-doubt. So I learn to label my emotions. I learned to regulate my emotional responses through things such as mindfulness, breathing techniques, grounding techniques. So when stress starts to amplify, I ground down through those, taking a moment to pause, be in the moment in my body. And I practice self-compassion. So treating myself as I would a friend rather than that harsh inner critic with self-judgment. Another bucket I think is really helpful is using techniques out of acceptance and commitment therapy, so psychological flexibility. So I'm going to take action despite the fear. I may be daunted by this experience, but I'm still going to move into it. So I'm accepting self-doubts without letting it control me. I'm focusing on my values and the process rather than the fear and the outcome. So that means I shift from I must avoid failure to something like I want to contribute and grow. And then I reduce any tendency to avoid. So I take small steps. I speak up for myself in meetings. I take opportunities for leadership roles. I present my work. So those exposure experiences help me to build confidence. And then the last bucket that I think is really helpful is aligning with that growth mindset. So I'm embracing the reality that growth comes from action, right? It's not something I'm inherently born with, is that I learn by doing. Confidence isn't a prerequisite for success. It's a byproduct of taking action. It's knowing that through persistence, learning from challenges, that I shift how I think about success and failure and ultimately increase my sense of self. And then lastly, I think it's important to know that the goal isn't never to feel like an imposter. It's not to not let it hold you back. So I'm willing and apt to continue to push my zone of comfort into, here's an opportunity to grow. Let's try it. This process is really important. I have a valued sense of self, and I develop by taking this small step towards who I want to be.
So it sounds to me like confidence is a major player in imposter syndrome
Mhm.
rather than competency.
Absolutely.
So it isn't that one is incompetent and can't do the work. Okay. That would be a view from the outside. Gee, I hired you to do this job and you're not getting it done, as an example. Okay.
Mhm.
Versus the imposter syndrome is I know how to do the job, but I don't feel adequate enough to do it, even though I'm capable. That
Correct.
okay.
Yeah. So it is that self doubt, it is that inner critic that's coming up. I'm paying attention to this negative self talk that impacts my sense of capability. Doesn't mean it's accurate.
Yeah. I would think that and I spent many years in the corporate world, I would think that there would be a lot less substance abuse if people mastered this imposter syndrome. Does that make any sense?
Certainly, I think things such as substance abuse is a coping mechanism in some respects. I'm uncomfortable. I don't like what I'm feeling. I'm turning to something else to diminish that feeling. So if I was able to pause and recognize the factors that are at play, that this is a self-perception, the way I talk to myself, that my self-expectations, if I could pause to then reflect on what do I expect of self? Can I provide self-compassion? Can I learn to reframe my self-talk? Can I take chances and go from this fixed mindset into a growth of this is really about the process rather than an outcome? One is able to live with more self-compassion and kindness and enjoy in some ways this process. So it's getting away from that rigid mindset to a more fluid mindset.
Right. So when you do your work, have your PhD in psychology, but you also do coaching. And so how can you explain the differences for somebody listening in between when you're a psychologist working with a client versus a coach working with a client?
That's a great question. So, in terms of being a psychologist and working in terms of sort of a regulatory body, so that we are helping individual to potentially manage, it depends on, so let me back up a bit, depends on where you registered. But there's usually an intersection of mental health with that if I'm going to work as a social psychologist. It may be a piece of educating and getting into more complex issues as the psychologist. In terms of coaching, it may be more in terms of education around it and motivation. How can I help this individual in terms of motivating them into a different behavioral piece? It may be the complexity of the circumstance. It really depends on when we meet and do that assessment of what are the needs of this individual. Is this really more of a mental health zone that we need to drill down further and it'll be more ongoing versus that coaching of how can I help inspire this individual, tweak down into what are the particulars they need, and it's probably the severity, if that
I
answers.
see. Do you do your work personally, face to face, or do you do it online? How do you guys work?
Yeah. So one of the silver linings of post-COVID life is that there's been this increase of using the internet. So our office, our clinic is 100% online. So we meet, it's called teletherapy. So we have virtual sessions, which allows us to access a greater number of clients. So everything's we meet through Zoom and we'll meet with our clients. And it's like similar to in person. We've seen that this seems to align and facilitate a lot of people in the workforce because of the hours. Commuting to meet in person, as much as I still think there's great merit to it, it has been a hindrance for many people. So this has opened up accessibility in many regards.
Really?
Mhm.
So I'm hearing you say it's more effective.
Well, it certainly allows more people in terms of effectiveness. I haven't seen any literature on that, but I would say it's comparable. Absolutely. I think each individual needs to find what is their comfort zone. I think there are merits to online and some in person. But there's each person's going to vary somewhat. It's a slightly different experience, but I think one can hone it and develop the skills just to connect. Really big piece of doing this kind of individual work is, can I connect with that clinician? Can I show up as my authentic self so I'm seen and heard? And do I respect and value the knowledge that they're sharing with me? So can I really work collaboratively with this person? And I think you do that online through teletherapy equally as well as in person.
So tell me a little bit about your organization. You're part of the Amanda Tove team. So what is that? There's a bunch of you, right?
Yeah, so Dr. Amanda Tobe is an organizational psychologist, and she founded the firm approximately 4 or 5 years ago now. I could be wrong about that. Amanda is an expert in fear of public speaking. So, as an organizational psychologist, she came up with the idea that a number of people struggle with that fear of public speaking around the anxiety. And so she has really started that with a niche that she started to develop and over years started to expand. So we focus on career orientated psychological services, being that we can do one on one individual work, we do groups, we do career development, career coaching, and some support around entrepreneurship. So each individual clinician has their own specialty area. So I work in the area of imposter syndrome, anxiety, social anxiety, low mood, and career development. So I'll get to know my clients. We do a one-on-one assessment. What are their needs? What are their goals? Understanding what have been their lived experience to date and the intersection of how it's manifesting in their career. Identify what their psychotherapeutic goals are, and then work over a number of sessions of starting to address some of these underlying challenges that they may have, sort through them so that they can execute and present in the workforce in a different way. In terms of fear of public speaking, where Amanda is her niche area, is really developing those skills around how can I overcome my fear of public speaking so I can present as my authentic self. So I've worked with her doing some group work, individual work around that as well. We also have an individual who helps young adults in that career transition from the post-secondary or from high school as to who am I and where do I want to go. And then another clinician is really good at that, developing those public speaking skills from a speech pathologist. How can I present, articulate myself so that I come across with that confidence?
Wow. That's a lot of stuff. That's a real organization then. So you guys currently, are you doing any work in the States or do you plan to?
Yeah. At this moment, we haven't, but we are definitely considering opening up. It's some of those complexities around regulation, but we would love to because I think there is a growing need and we know that. So we want to be able to adapt and be as flexible and inclusive to everyone who could benefit from our skills and what we offer. Keep us in mind. It may happen in the near future.
How does somebody find you guys?
Yeah, you can find us on the internet. So if you look up Dr. Amanda Tobe and Associates, you will find us there. You can email us. Yeah, it's Dr. Amanda Tobe, Tobe, and
Okay.
Associates.
All right. Well, very good. I certainly appreciate you taking the time today to share. I mean, I think this is a really in the corporate world, I think this is a much bigger issue than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
Um, this imposter syndrome, emotional intelligence, and how it plays out and creates I just think it creates a lot of conflict in organizations that if they knew how to recognize it and had a place to go to help them with it, it would make a big difference in their organization.
Well, thank you. We agree. And we're hoping to be able to make that transition forward for the world that we can show up as our best selves. And we want to help support people in doing that. We do have an imposter syndrome group that we run that has been really helpful for those participants. Instead of doing one-on-one work, is a group which normalizes this. And we know that we're not just the only individual struggling with some of these thoughts of self-doubt. So you can find that information on our website as well.
Very good. Well, Dr. Meagan Yarmey, thank you so much for being here today. And I actually look forward to speaking with you again sometime in the future.
Wonderful. Thanks, Johnny. It's been a pleasure. It's really been great. And I would love to come back and speak with you and your audience at another time.
All right. Well, great. You have been listening to Minutes with Mango, Life in Motion. Subscribe to hear a new and unique guest each week as they comment on their life's journey and share experiences with lifestyle, culture, and career. You can always find us at minuteswithmango.com.